I walked outside this morning, and it was brisk out. Like, it was pretty chilly, which was a welcome relief relative to the weather we've had for like what seems like the eternity, at least the last couple of months. And it's still nice. It's cool. It's sunny. It's gorgeous outside. And all I could think, especially with the crispness in the air this morning, was it's football season. Like, it is game on. Let's go. And then I was thinking, my oldest, we dropped off in Bloomington last week for the start of his freshman year. And today's the first day of classes. And all I could then think about was, man, is there a better time to be on the Bloomington campus than a day like today?
That's great.
Like,
yeah, I agree.
All the scenery, all of it. It's got to be, it's such a, I don't think any freshman realizes how spoiled they are to have a day like today to be their first day of classes. Yeah. And to be rolling into home opener this Saturday and all the things.
I agree. I'm so thankful, grateful just that right now the weather is the way it is, because as you know, it can get just miserable hot, and I'd still be excited with this week, but the forecast looks really, really good for the rest of the week and for the home opener. So hopefully it'll stay the way it is right now. And yeah, it couldn't be a better week. Could be a better, I agree with you, better way to start your freshman year. Have a week like this.
Agreed. Scott, I know you had a son that was a Fiji there at IU. Joe's son, who, as you just mentioned, just dropped off for freshman year, is also in the house. So while his pledgeship hasn't formally started, they'll have an interesting week, to say the least. And I think we all know how that's going to go for him, and can't wait to hear the stories.
I love hearing that. That is so awesome. In fact, so my youngest, so 3 of our 5 were Fijis. So Heidi's middle son Sam was Fiji, and then Zach, and then my youngest Nick was. In fact, Nick and his pledge class, they have an annual golf outing now in Michigan that they get together for. He just got back last week. They went for a long weekend, and they had like 25 of their 31, I think. It was like crazy how
that's a good turnout.
The participation is just unbelievable, which is super cool.
That is awesome. That is awesome.
On that note, we had our, I hate to say it, 30th this past summer reunion, and I think we had almost 20, over 20, 27-ish there. Obviously, very much missed Andy, but
right.
Overall, for those that are still around, the turnout was pretty solid, and needless to say, we kind of picked up right where we left off, even after 30 years, which was great, as you can imagine.
The bond is I mean, I don't have a lot to totally compare it to, but just the bond that is created there is just phenomenal. Yeah. Just super cool. I'm very fortunate that our kids had an opportunity to be involved, for sure.
Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Industrious Podcast. We appreciate all of you guys joining us from wherever you get your podcasts, or for joining us on the Assessa YouTube channel. Thank you for tuning in. While you're there, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell icon so you can be alerted when new episodes like this one drop. We would greatly appreciate it. Special guest today, special close to us for sure. Hopefully you guys will get some value out of this. Mr. Scott Dolson, the Director of Intercollegiate Athletics at Indiana University. Scott, welcome to the Industrious Podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me on. I was looking forward to it. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Scott, why don't you, obviously I know your background, but why don't you give our listeners and viewers a little background on yourself?
Yeah, real quick. I grew up in northern Indiana, Michigan City, Indiana, and grew up a huge IU fan from up there. My grandfather went to school here but couldn't afford to stay, and my sister and I were first generation college students. There were no other school that we were going to go to than Indiana just because of him. Like most kids, kind of my age, I grew up wanting to play basketball for IU. You know, we were really rolling when, you know, in the mid 70s. I was 9 when we won the championship in 76. But I had a talent problem, and it wasn't going to, the playing for Coach Knight wasn't in the cards for me. But my best friend growing up in high school was a guy named Delray Brooks, who ended up being Mr. Basketball. And he called me from his visit and said, basically, you should be, I committed to play for Coach Knight. You should be a manager here. Steve Alford's roommate at the time was a manager. I hadn't really thought about it, but I ended up being a package deal, which is kind of, really one of the most fortunate things ever happened to me, because basically I've never left. I was a manager my 4 years, won the national championship my junior year, ended up working for Tim Knight, Coach Knight's oldest son, for a little over a year and a half, working on Coach Knight's businesses, and Tim had his own business, which was an incredible opportunity as well, that kept me in town and really learned a lot. And then started working for the varsity club in the athletic department shortly thereafter, and kind of grew up in fundraising and was able to get more responsibility. Never planned on staying here my whole career. Just kind of every time something might change, it just really worked out to stay, and became AD 5 years ago. Fred Glass gave me an opportunity to be his deputy AD 10 years prior to that, which was another incredible opportunity. And then became AD 5 years ago. I feel like, I'm extremely lucky and just so grateful that I've had an opportunity to work at a place that I love. And that sounds too corny, but that's a fact. I mean, there's never a day I come here and I don't feel very, very lucky.
Yeah, I know you and I had touched on this a while back, but I think IU was lucky to have someone like you, and not to, be a buck hisser or anything, but seriously, I think it's rare these days, right? I mean, in particular in the athletic field, but I think it's probably rare across the business spectrum for anyone to be at a single institution for 20 plus years anymore. And so I think, the experiences that you've had there, you talk about the opportunities, but you've made the most of those opportunities. And I think IU is certainly better off for it, having someone who has that experience going all the way back to a student, but up to today. I think that lends itself well versus maybe bringing people in from the outside who don't really have that tie, if you will, to the university. And I think I would suspect that connection plays itself well into a lot of the decisions that you guys make today.
You're exactly right. Around the country, this business, there's a lot of transition, a lot of moving around. So to stay at one school this long, I know when I meet my new colleague, let's say, or as I talk to people in the industry, I am a little bit of a unicorn in that not a lot of people just can kind of go to the same school and stay there this entire time, at least this day and age. Right. So I feel fortunate. It does, there's certainly pros and cons to it. Sometimes people look at it like, you set your own ways, you always only know one way, but I look at it as certainly a positive, and at the same time try to keep really in tune to what's happening around the country and not feel like I'm in a vacuum here at IU.
Yeah. So you went a bit of the groveling route. What I picked up on was more of an investigative route of, so you're saying your third year as a manager is when we won the 87 national championship.
Right.
So if we were to go looking around your attic, we might finally find the missing fish or dolphin or whatever it is from Showalter Fountain.
Actually, it's funny. No, I wish that were true, but no, I don't have that. That is an interesting phenomenon. But actually, because I was in New Orleans, and it was funny because it was awesome after the game and so forth and so on. But I did feel like I was missing out a little bit not being here in Bloomington, because, I'd hear back from friends, and it was such a chaotic scene, and celebration was so huge here. But certainly was just so happy to be there in New Orleans and celebrate with the team as well.
Scott, this is kind of a broad question, but with all the years that you've been in intercollegiate athletics, what are the biggest changes that you've seen, with each 5 to 10 year span where something, transitions, and obviously that leads into today, which I think the landscape, not being in that industry, is so significantly different. And you guys are all, not just yourself, but all the schools in the 80s are really trying to figure out, okay, what does this mean for us today? And quite frankly, where is this going?
Yeah, basically the business has just become more and more complicated. Seems like it just is exponentially grown over the time I've been here. You go back to even, it felt big in the late 80s or, 87 when we won the championship. It felt like it was a business, but the business of college athletics, the money, the television deals, and certainly where does the money go? The student athlete benefits, and I trust, rulings, just the business has just exploded, and there's a lot of good that has come from that, and then certainly some challenges. But we've just tried to really embrace that and tried to adapt. And that's kind of our new theme here in athletics, which we've got a big all-staff meeting tomorrow, but our theme is now never daunted. That's our mantra. Mm-hmm. And we say that because we feel like that we have to really make certain that we are innovative. We adapt whatever cards we're dealt, we're going to play them best we can, but then stay true to our foundational elements that really make IU athletics. So, yeah, I'd say the business has changed just tremendously.
Yeah, I would imagine the last 2 or 3 years has been basically warp speed relative to anything before that.
It has. It really has. And honestly, the last 10 years is even like Fred Glass's last 5 and then my first 5. That Fred's last 5 kind of knew things were coming, and there's a lot of maybe sort of attempts to try to change it and to adapt, and then it just then zoomed up. So when Fred was AD his last 5 years, we were adding benefits to student athletes like the cost of attendance and deregulating food. It was really the time of deregulation in college athletics. And then when I took over, right when COVID started, and then COVID brought a whole nother set of challenges, and then really NIL and just, again, you call it deregulation, but it's really just a way to say, trying to figure out what benefits that you provide student athletes, that at the same time you try to keep somewhat of a level playing field around the country, still stress the educational foundation of college athletics without tripping any antitrust wires. And so that's kind of a complicated mix.
How do you, when NIL first came around and then as it really sort of exploded, how do you get your arms around that to create programs between the university and then, independent but official collectives, or independent but unofficial, collectives, for lack of a better term? How did that process play out before we got to where we are with the, today and revenue sharing?
Yeah, I would say it's probably a combination of trying to really understand the rules, really always keep our ear to the ground, ask a lot of questions, dig deep, find out what exactly are the rules that we're dealing with. And then once you really understand where you are in that point of time, trying to make certain that you can maximize that opportunity for the department, for our student athletes within those rules. So early on, and it's funny, it evolved fairly quickly. It became evident that in the recruiting process or the retention process of student athletes, that you need to drive NIL deals within the rules the best you can, because the more valuable of a program you have, if I come play football at IU or basketball or women's basketball or baseball, how do I know that at IU that I can really maximize or leverage my ability to bring the most benefit to myself from an NIL perspective? And so that drive for recruiting then really started a whole new industry of collectives and raising money on the outside so that money generated could produce NIL deals all through they're all legal to then make your school as attractive as possible. So I think we're always very proactive on that. And I really think we've had some key volunteers that stepped up when we needed them the most, that put us in the game. And we looked at it as we could use this opportunity as an advantage for us to try to gain an edge and try to compete at the highest levels across the country, because I think that's what's best for the university.
So how does that play into the specific athletic program? Say, we talked over the last couple of years about how challenging it probably has to be a coach. Let's say a football coach, men's basketball, women's basketball, whatever it may be, where you went from being a coach and coaching your team on the floor and practice and games, obviously the pre-NIL recruiting process, but now you have that element over the top. And it's, if I were just a coach and wanted to really just be a coach, it'd have to be probably frustrating at times for both the recruitment and the retention side. What are the resources or tools that the athletic department provides to help pull some of that burden off the specific program?
Yeah, it's super challenging for a coach these days, because what I find most coaches want is they just want a level playing field. And prior to NIL, unless someone cheated and didn't play by the rules, basically everybody had the same offerings to prospective student athletes or from a retention standpoint. Meaning scholarships were limited. So if I'm the head basketball coach in Indiana, I had 13 scholarships. So you're offering a scholarship, and then as recruits would come in, you're selling the opportunity to play in our system, how we can develop you, the facilities we have, our fan base, the play in front of our crowds, all that stuff. And so the NIL landscape isn't a real level playing field other than here's what the rules are, but there are schools that can generate more NIL resources than others. And that to me was one of the toughest things for coaches to deal with, is to say all of a sudden, at the end of the day, I'm up against school A or school B, and if they have more resources, there's no cap, there's no limit to what they can do NIL-wise, but we can only generate what we can generate. That creates a whole new kind of thing in the mix that makes it really hard. So from a department, specific to your question, we try to do everything we can to be competitive in the marketplace, to provide a staff that understood how to work within the new system. You hear terms like GM and modern terms like pro sports. And, we don't have that title GM in our department or within our programs, but we have a really robust staff that understands how to manage the new world we're in, that kind of serve in those different roles that you see maybe in pro sports, but still understand the college environment. So for us, it's providing the resources, whether it's the financial resources the best we can, or the staffing to adapt to the new world.
Yeah, I would say prior to some of the infrastructure around this getting built out, NIL went from zero to like supreme arms race really quickly. And to your point,
you're right.
The big guys, were ruling the day relative to either someone in a smaller conference or a smaller school in a power conference, whatever it may be. And I think as a fan, understandable, but really frustrating, because it started to negatively muddy the waters of college sports and blur the line between college and professional. And I'm a guy who loves college sports more than pro sports, so it just was maybe a little squeamish as a fan.
I think you're not alone. And I think there's a feeling out there, is this becoming pro sports? And we talk a lot about balance, because I don't want our fans to think that all of a sudden our kids are completely different. And this is a whole different scenario here, in that what we balance is our kids still go to class. We had an all student athlete meeting yesterday to kick off the semester, and our expectations of them are not changed than they were 5 years ago or 20 years ago. We love the college environment, but at the same time, it is a new world, and student athletes have additional resources, additional benefits that they can certainly capitalize on. And so we want them to thrive in that world as well, but not at the expense of taken away from what college athletics is really all about. And that's easy to say, and that can be hard to do at times when you have student athletes making, substantial amounts of money, but it's incumbent on us to really make certain we educate them from a financial literacy standpoint. We understand teaching values of making certain they're appreciative of the opportunity they have, that they help others, a lot of things that we do to try to make certain we don't lose that college feel.
Yeah, I think you just touched on one of the questions I have, which is, when I was 20, if someone had stroked me a significant NIL check,
I would have made some really bad decisions.
Yeah, I don't know that I'd have been the most, financially responsible. And so one of my questions is, what tools and resources exist for student athletes to teach them, the adulting of personal finance, especially when there's, for most college kids, a windfall in a sense.
Well, that, and to caveat onto that, what percentage of intercollegiate athletic student athletes go on to professional sports? I mean, it's still probably single digit percentages, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
So,
and also it's probably important to note that, out of I'm close on this, say 650 student athletes, there are 110, let's say, that have substantial or meaningful NIL deals. And that's not to say the rest of them don't have some type of deals, but there's a difference between a a large check and maybe I'm getting free T-shirts because I tweeted about this apparel company. So, we're still, relatively speaking, the percentage of student athletes who are getting those big checks is still relatively small compared to the whole student athlete population. But you're right. We worry about financial literacy. We do a lot. This new incredible partnership with Merchants Bank is going to be really massive in that regard in terms of what we're doing to educate all of our student athletes on financial literacy. And then we also, I worry every day about gambling. I worry about making students who have resources that, most students wouldn't have, making certain they make good decisions. So we try to stay on top of that as best we can and educate them and surround them with the right people that can prevent them from making poor decisions.
I'm glad you mentioned the Merchants deal. When I saw that announcement, I immediately texted Petrie and said, by the way, on behalf of all Hoosier alumni, thank you very much. We appreciate it. And then shortly after I sent that, I went to another guy that works there who went to Notre Dame and said, hey, thanks for giving up your bonus this year and sent it to Bloomington.
That's awesome.
He sent me an emoji response, and you can imagine what the emoji was, and I'll just leave it at that.
It's awesome. Yeah, that was a definite, to say it was a huge deal for us is a big understatement. It's a really, really big deal for, as I said on Friday, multiple reasons. You couldn't be more grateful for that. But the financial literacy part probably gets a little hidden because it's such a big financial deal. But that financial literacy part was super important to Mike Petrie and the Merchants folks and really important to us as well.
What would you say? I mean, no one has a crystal ball that's perfect by any means. But where do you think all this is headed? I mean, if you had to forecast even just the next 5 years, which is almost impossible, where do you think a lot of this is headed?
It feels like there needs to be some type of a federal legislation, some federal laws that are in place that really clearly define a lot of this, help level the playing field, help provide clarity. The challenge right now when you have different states establishing state laws relative to student athlete benefits and lots of a hodgepodge of different lawsuits, judges' rulings different in this state versus this state. It's hard. If you can imagine this, it's hard to have if you have a 10-year-old youth soccer league in your community without some consistent set of rules for them to compete in. Can you imagine just on a national scale the size of college athletics when just setting rules is so challenging? And it's nobody's fault. It's got so big. What's happened is when you try to apply normal business law to college athletics, meaning antitrust protections, when you have this educational-based model in where you've really tried to have fair competition, it's super hard. And so I think that there's got to be at some point, I would think, if I had a crystal ball, and there's certainly a lot of work being done on this now, so I'm not Nostradamus for saying this, but there has to be some type of national solution so that we can get some antitrust protection. We can have rules that everybody plays by, still maximize the benefits for student athletes. Not only anybody saying student athletes shouldn't be able to maximize their value, but how to get our arms around it is important to have, again, to protect the games, the competition, so that there is some type of fair competition in the future, and also to protect the educational model that we're in, and to protect also all sports, because you don't want, we're a broad-based program. We believe in that. The revenue is so big with football, men's basketball, and we've used that revenue to support the entire enterprise. At some point, if that revenue shifts and just goes to certain areas, it's going to come from somewhere, and you don't want an unintended consequence of all this to be that athletic departments just shrink quite a bit, and it's just a relatively few then who are benefiting from this unbelievable opportunity instead of the masses that benefit now.
As you were saying that, a couple of months ago, there was, if I'm not mistaken, some form of legislation or something that was approved, and that tied back to the revenue sharing side of things, where the cap this year is $20-some-odd million with measures of increase built in annually. Mm-hmm. How does that replace NIL? Does that offset NIL? Like, what does that mean for today's rules?
Yeah, so what that was that we settled a lawsuit, the House case. And as part of that settlement, there was a class action lawsuit. There's some damages that were paid backwards to a collection of student athletes who couldn't benefit from NIL. I think the statute of limitations, I think it goes back like 5 years from the date it was filed or somewhere in there, but that's the back damages. But moving forward, that's where we established then the new landscape of college athletics where student or athletic departments can share up to $20.5 million. It's 22% of the average media rights, ticket sales, and sponsorship from the Power Four conferences. So that average is somewhere around 98, 99 million from those categories. 22% of that is 20.5 million. And that will probably increase somewhere in the neighborhood of 4% a year moving forward. So there's a 10-year settlement where we can share that revenue. How that's different, schools don't have to do that. If you can afford it, you do it. But if you're going to be in the Power Four conference, for sure, I've not heard of anyone who's not figured out how to do that. But how that is related to NIL, then NIL is outside the department. The concept is that student athletes can still benefit from that, but it needs to be true NIL and market-based and not sort of created or manufactured by a collective that has no business purpose and is just there to induce recruits or to retain student athletes to stay. And so it's called NIL Go. It's a clearinghouse where any deal that a student athlete receives over $600 has to go into this clearinghouse, which is it's a software program that basically says whether that was a fair market value deal or not.
Gotcha.
So it's a lot. It's kind of complicated. It's hard to explain, but that's sort of the internal is the rev share, which you can pay that out however you want right now, and then the external is NIL, which needs to go through the clearinghouse.
Sounds like a pain that you know what.
It's complicated.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, Scott, as we start to wrap things up here, I mentioned this earlier, but if you were talking to the 22 to 25-year-old kid or the 22 to 25-year-old Scott Dolson today who wants to follow the path that you had, what advice would you give to them?
Definitely to really stay true to who you are. And I think back early in my career, I just had sometimes a misconception that you had to try to be a certain way to have success, or you had to try to kind of hit a home run. And I think what I found out over time is, you just have to be yourself, and it's so much less complicated than maybe I originally thought in terms of those old school values of just working hard and treating people right, and understanding what your role is and performing that role. When I talk to students, I tell them all the time to not overcomplicate it. And I think early on in my career, it was kind of this, I thought that you had to really know somebody or you had to be like this super smart genius to really make it to the top. And it's like, no, I think there's just basic fundamentals of doing your job that still today, no matter how things have changed, are still what I think determine how successful someone is or not. And I'm a perfect example that I'm not the smartest administrator in the athletic department right now. I guarantee I'm not. But I know how to lead, and I understand kind of how to bring the right people together to work hard for a common cause and hold people accountable and hopefully make good things happen. And so as I look back early on in my career, those things that I probably wish I'd have known then.
I do have one final question before we wrap. This weekend, if I'm not mistaken, is the official introduction, and you're smiling. I know you know where I'm going with this.
Oh, I'm so pumped. Yeah, so pumped.
The Bison is coming out, right? We're freeing the Bison this weekend on Saturday.
Correct.
Now I have a two-part question. The first part, help my memory. I remember as a little kid going down to football games back in the Bill Mallory days, so like mid 80s, and I feel like the Stadium Cups back then had a bison on them. Was that an official university thing, or was that a marketing program that somebody, maybe like a sponsor, had done? Because someone asked me where'd the bison come from. I was like, well, I think it's definitely retro for people like us. But what was the genesis of that outside of the bison on the state seal for Indiana?
Yes, I'll give you the short version, but I can give you the whole. Obviously, I've been deep into this, and the The bison was a state animal, or is a state animal on the state seal. The bison in 1965 was approved by the student government to be the official mascot of IU. It was on the books. They voted on it. They made it the mascot. They had on the sideline for the 67 Rose Bowl team, they had a mascot. It was a bison. It was in a suit. For some reason in 68 or 69, somewhere in there, it just went away. They didn't like the suit. It was hot. It just didn't work. So it was never removed as a mascot. It just was never on the field again or around athletics. But historically, back to what you said, like in the 80s, like Bill Mowry on the helmets when someone had like a great game, or he had these little bison decals he put on the bison has been at Knicks. So it's been around. There's been remnants of it forever. So what we did is started a couple of years ago, we kind of woke up to sleeping bison in a lot of ways and feel like we wanted to be that it was never really, it's nothing new. It's been around forever. It just sort of been in hiding. And that's when we, the videos that came out, our big thing is that it was in a box, and the student government they voted this past December, they had another student government meeting, and they said, they reenacted what happened in 1965 and said, we want to bring the bison back, that kind of revisit that act that was signed back so many years ago. So when that happened, the theory is that it was in a box and it woke up and it broke out of the box, and now it's here for good. So it's a lot of fun. People have embraced it, and not everybody's a huge mascot fan. And I always was really suspect. Before I learned more about the bison story, I always thought it was going to be super hard for us to just generate a mascot. I didn't like some of the ideas of just creating a character that was the mascot. But the more I learned about the history of the bison, I think it's always been here, and we just haven't really utilized it. So I hope when it's around, the people see it, feel like it's just part of who we are. And we've got some cool stuff about the bison and what it stands for. And it stands for a lot of what we are as Hoosiers, right? When there's challenging, a storm is coming, bison, when a storm is coming, bison go into the storm. They don't go away. And that's what we do as Hoosiers. And we work hard. We stay together. Just a lot of this stuff like that. So obviously I ramble on, but it's a lot of fun, and our student athletes have embraced it. And I think our fans will really enjoy it.
Yeah, and the second part of my question is probably the most important part. Did you throw your name in the hat to be the person that got to wear the bison uniform on the sideline?
I did it, but if that's what it would take, I would have done it. But it is funny. We've got 5 students who kind of will rotate, and it's been a great thing with the students. They went to mascot camp this summer. There's a mascot camp where all the big mascots from around the country get together, and so we've taken it really seriously, and it's been a whole lot of fun. And again, it's a good reminder, particularly in the challenging times we're in. You mentioned just sometimes with being a college fan, and is it going to still be college sports? For us, I think having the fun and just it's a good reminder that we're in this for the right reasons, and we don't want the financial aspects of college athletics to change how people feel. And in some small way, I think the bison will remind everyone that it's a fun time.
Yeah. Well said. Yeah. I would agree with you. We're glad Hoosier the Bison is back. You have a story to tell there, which I think will be well received. And I think the way that brand is brought back will probably evolve a little bit as well over the next few years. And regardless, I think most people will appreciate it for sure.
The gear is going to be awesome with the bison on it. We've already seen a bunch of stuff, and I think our fans will just be another. We always have people asking us for more cool IU gear, but I think having the bison on some stuff, I've seen some hats that are like epic already that I could see for a Fiji reunion, you guys all wearing a Fiji hat with the bison on it. It'll be a super cool thing.
Well, Scott, we had at our 30th, we had some koozies made, and I'll see you probably Saturday, and I'll show you one of them.
Okay.
It's right up that alley.
Oh, that's awesome. I love to hear that.
Yeah,
that's great.
I look forward to it.
Let me just say, man, how much I appreciate you guys having me on. It means a lot, and your support and friendship mean a great deal to me personally, but more importantly to the university. It just means a lot to have you guys behind us, and just really appreciate you guys having me on.
Well, you're welcome. We're happy to have you. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you Saturday, and look forward to this season of football, basketball, and everything else that comes IU's way.
Awesome. We're planning for a big year.
Hey guys, thanks for joining us on this episode of the Industrious Podcast. We appreciate you all joining us from wherever you get your podcasts and from whatever school you went to or represent or are a fan of. We know not everybody's IU fans. It's okay. Not everybody can be, but we appreciate you taking this in. We hope you found value in this conversation, not just from the interest that is NC college athletics these days, but also how you can apply this to your business and whatnot. Again, at the end of the day, as you've seen Scott do over the last 20 plus years in his position, they will continue to do, be industrious.